Chains rattled in the shadow of Rome's Colosseum, where a single slave dared to defy an empire. Welcome to the untold story of the Roman slave who defied an empire, a tale of courage against impossible odds. Grab a cup of tea, take a seat, and let this epic unfold. If you're gripped by the drama, hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. Chapter 1. The shackles of Spartacus. In the sweltering summer of 73 BCE, the Roman Republic sprawled across the Mediterranean, its marble temples and bustling forums masking a brutal truth. Millions lived in chains. Among them was Spartacus, a Thracian warrior turned slave, whose name would soon echo through history. Born in the rugged hills of Thrace, a land of fierce tribes, Spartacus was likely captured during a Roman campaign, his freedom traded for a life of servitude. By the time we meet him, he's toiling in a dusty gladiator school in Capua, his muscles scarred from battles staged for Rome's amusement. But beneath his weathered exterior burned a fire no whip could extinguish, a dream of liberty that would shake the empire's foundations. Our story begins in the Ludus, a training ground for gladiators owned by Lentulus Batiatus, a man whose greed matched his cruelty. The Ludus was a fortress of despair, its stone walls ringing with the clank of iron and the groans of the enslaved. Spartacus, now in his early 30s, was no ordinary gladiator. Tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing eyes that seemed to see. Beyond the arena, he fought with a ferocity that thrilled crowds but troubled his masters. They saw a man who could be broken, but Spartacus saw something else. A chance, each morning, as he trained under the blistering sun, wielding a gladius against fellow captives, he studied the guards, the gates, the weaknesses in Batiatus's domain. Life in the Ludus was relentless. Gladiators rose at dawn, fed meagre rations of barley porridge and stale bread, just enough to keep them strong for the arena. Training was brutal, sparring with wooden swords until bruises bloomed, or running laps under the lash of overseers. Spartacus, paired often with Crixus, a burly Gaul with a quick temper, formed a cautious bond. Crixus mocked Spartacus's quiet demeanor, saying, "You fight like a wolf, Thracian, but you brood like a poet." Yet Spartacus shared little of his past, only hinting at a life in Thrace, where he'd fought as a free man, perhaps even loved a woman named Sura, whose memory lingered in his rare smiles. The gladiators weren't just fighters, they were commodities. Batiatus sold their blood to cheering crowds, pitting them against beasts or each other in spectacles that fed Rome's hunger for violence. Spartacus had survived a dozen matches, his skill with the short sword earning him the nickname the Thracian Wolf. But survival wasn't enough. At night, locked in a cramped cell, he'd trace the scars on his arms, each one a reminder of Rome's theft, his home, his family, his freedom. Whispers among the slaves told of others who'd fled, only to be hunted down and crucified, their bodies lining the Appian Way. Yet Spartacus listened, his mind turning over possibilities. One evening, as the Ludus settled into an uneasy quiet, a spark ignited. Batiatus, hosting a lavish banquet for local nobles, demanded a mock fight to entertain his guests. Spartacus and Crixus were chosen, ordered to spar without mercy, their wooden swords replaced with blunted steel. The nobles clapped, wine sloshing, as the two men clashed in the courtyard, dust swirling under torchlight. But when Crixus landed a heavy blow, splitting Spartacus's lip, something snapped. Spartacus parried fiercely, his eyes locking with Batiatus's. "Enough," the Lannister barked, but Spartacus saw his chance. A guard distracted, a gate left ajar. That night, in the cell block, Spartacus gathered a small circle. Crixus, Oenomaus, a stoic African gladiator, and Gannicus, a cocky Celt with a knack for locks. "We can stay and die for their sport," Spartacus whispered, his voice low but steady. "Or we fight for ourselves." Crixus scoffed. "Escape! They'll crucify us." But Oenomaus, his voice deep, said, "Better to die free than live, in chains." Gannicus grinned, twirling a stolen key. "I'm in, Thracian. Let's burn this place down." The plan was daring but simple. Overpower the guards, seize weapons, and flee to the hills before dawn. Spartacus knew the risks. Failure meant torture. Success meant a life on the run. Yet the memory of Thrace, of open skies and a woman's laughter, fueled him. He mapped the ludus in his mind, the armory's lock, the watchtower's blind spot, the narrow path to the stables. Crixus, skeptical but swayed by Spartacus's resolve, agreed to rally others. By midnight, 70 men were ready, their whispers a quiet storm. The breakout began at dawn, as the first light crept over Capua's walls. Spartacus struck first, disarming a guard with a swift blow, his stolen key unlocking the cell block. Crixus barreled through another, while Gannicus picked the armory door. The gladiators armed themselves, swords, spears, even kitchen knives, and surged toward the gate. Batiatus, roused by shouts, stood stunned as his ludus erupted in chaos. Guards fell, some fleeing, others fighting vainly against men trained to kill. Spartacus led the charge, his voice a rallying cry. "To freedom, brothers!" They breached the gate, spilling into the countryside, a ragtag band of 70 gladiators, now fugitives. Behind them, the ludus smouldered, a fire set by Gannicus, to cover their escape. Spartacus paused on a hill, looking back at the flames, his heart pounding with something new. Hope, but Rome's wrath was swift. By noon, word reached the Senate. A slave had defied the Republic, and Spartacus's name was on their lips. As Chapter 1 closes, Spartacus and his band vanish into the hills, their chains broken, but their fight just beginning. What will Rome's vengeance bring? If you're hooked, stay tuned for the next chapter of this epic rebellion. Chapter 2. The Fugitives' Fire. The rugged hills of Campania stretched before Spartacus and his band of 70 escaped gladiators, their breaths heavy with freedom's weight as they fled the burning ludus of Capua in 73 BCE. Dawn's light barely touched the rocky paths where they hid, a motley crew of Thracians, Gauls, and Celts armed with stolen swords and spears. Spartacus, his eyes scanning the horizon for Roman patrols, led them to a forested ridge, a temporary haven from the empire's wrath. His plan was clear: stay hidden, gather strength, and turn their flight into a fight. But Rome's vengeance loomed, and every step deepened their defiance. Spartacus chose a sheltered cave as their base, its mouth concealed by vines. The men, still reeling from their escape, gathered around a small fire, their faces etched with exhaustion and hope. Crixus, the burly Gaul, sharpened a blade, his voice gruff. "We're free, Thracian, but for how long? Rome's legions will hunt us like dogs." Spartacus crouched, his gaze steady. "Then we become wolves. We strike their farms, their caravans, and grow our numbers." Oenomaus, The African gladiator nodded, his deep voice calm. Slaves will join us. They suffer as we did. Gannicus, the Celt, grinned, tossing a stolen coin. Let's bleed Rome's gold first. Their first raid came at dusk, targeting a nearby villa owned by a wealthy senator. Spartacus led a small group, moving silently through olive groves. The villa's guards, unprepared for trained fighters, fell quickly. They seized food, weapons, and a dozen slaves, who joined them willingly, eyes wide with disbelief at their liberators. One, a young Greek named Varro, proved adept with maps, charting paths to avoid Roman outposts. There's a village nearby, Varro said, pointing to a sketch. More slaves, but it's guarded. Spartacus nodded, his mind already planning the next strike. By nightfall, the band returned to the cave, their hall bolstering morale. The new recruits, mostly field hands, shared tales of Rome's cruelty. Whippings, families torn apart, lives sold for coin. Spartacus listened, his resolve hardening. He spoke to the group, his voice low but fierce. Rome thinks us beasts, but we are men. We fight not just for freedom, but for those still in chains. The men cheered, their voices echoing in the cave, a spark of rebellion kindling. Days passed, and their raids grew bolder. They ambushed a supply caravan, capturing armor and horses, and freed 20 more slaves from a quarry. Word of Spartacus spread, a whisper among the oppressed. A gladiator, defying Rome, but danger closed in. A Roman scout, spotted near the ridge, was silenced by Oenomaus, but not before signaling a nearby garrison. They're coming, Oenomaus warned, his spear bloodied. Spartacus gripped his sword, his eyes on the horizon. Then we move at dawn. As Chapter 2 closes, Spartacus's band grows, their raids fanning the flames of rebellion. But Rome's eyes are upon them, and the hunt begins. What will the next strike bring? Chapter 3. The shadow of Vesuvius Dawn's first light crept over the jagged peaks of Campania, casting long shadows as Spartacus and his growing band of rebels, now nearly 100 strong, slipped deeper into the hills, the threat of Roman pursuit ever closer. The air was sharp with pine and the distant tang of ash from Mount Vesuvius, looming like a silent judge over their path. Spartacus, his sword strapped to his side, led the group toward a hidden valley, guided by Varro's crude maps. Their raids had drawn blood and supplies, but also attention, and Rome's legions were stirring. Today, Spartacus would forge his ragtag followers into a force, knowing one misstep could end their fragile freedom. The valley, cradled by cliffs, offered cover and a clear view of approaching trails. Spartacus gathered his men beneath a canopy of oaks, their faces a mix of defiance and fear. Gladiators, freed slaves, and runaway farmers united by desperation. He climbed a boulder, his voice cutting through the morning chill. Rome hunts us, but we are not prey. We train, we fight, we become an army. Crixus, his arms crossed, grunted. An army? We're thieves with swords. Spartacus met his gaze. Thieves take, we liberate. Oenomaus, sharpening a spear, nodded. We need discipline, or we die. Gannicus, lounging against a tree, smirked. And more wine. Training began at once, Spartacus pairing gladiators with novices. He taught the former slaves to wield spears, to move as a unit, drawing on his Thracian warrior days. Varro, the Greek, organized supplies, tallying stolen grain and weapons. A new recruit, Mira, A fierce-eyed woman freed from the villa proved, skilled with a sling, her stones felling a deer for their meal. "You're wasted on cooking," Spartacus told her, handing her a dagger. She grinned, twirling it. "Let me at a Roman." The camp buzzed with purpose, laughter mingling with the clang of makeshift drills. Their next move was a daring raid on a Roman outpost, a small fort guarding a trade route. Spartacus scouted it at dusk, noting its 10 guards and palisade walls. "We strike at midnight," he whispered to Crixus and Oenomaus. Silent, swift, no mercy. Under moonlight, they crept forward, Mira's sling silencing a sentry. The gladiators scaled the walls, overwhelming the guards in moments. They seized swords, shields, and a crate of coin, but Spartacus paused at a chained slave, a boy no older than 15. "You're free," he said, breaking the lock. The boy, Agron, joined them, his eyes burning with gratitude. Back in the valley, the hall strengthened their resolve, but a scout's report chilled them. A Roman cohort, 200 strong, was marching from Capua, led by Praetor Glaba, a man known for crucifying rebels. "They'll track us," Varro warned, studying his map. Spartacus knelt by the fire, his mind racing. "We climb Vesuvius," he said. "Its slopes are treacherous. They won't follow." Crixus scoffed. "Hide on a volcano." Madness. But Oenomaus agreed. "It buys us time." At dawn they moved, scaling the mountain's rocky paths, their steps heavy with stolen gear. Vesuvius loomed, its peak shrouded in mist, a natural fortress. Spartacus paused, looking back at the distant plains where Rome's shadow grew. "We're not just running," he told Mira, who walked beside him. "We're building something." She nodded, her dagger gleaming. "A fight Rome won't forget." As Chapter 3 closes, Spartacus's rebels climb Vesuvius, their numbers swelling but danger closing in. Will the mountain shield them, or become their trap? Stay tuned for the next chapter of their defiance. Chapter 4. The Forge of Rebellion High, on the rocky slopes of Mount Vesuvius, Spartacus and his band of over 100 rebels carved a camp in the summer of 73 BCE. The volcano's sulphurous air, a constant reminder of their precarious refuge. Roman torches gleamed below, Praetor Glaber's cohort hunting them. Spartacus, his cloak tattered, aimed to forge his followers into an army to defy Rome's might. In a hidden crater, Spartacus organized the rebels, gladiators and freed slaves, into training groups. Crixus drilled novices with spears, growling, "Fight or die." Spartacus taught a Thracian sidestep, disarming Crixus to prove a point. Mira, a fierce woman, trained women with slings, her shots deadly. Varro, the Greek mapmaker, charted paths, warning, "This mountain's our shield." But a trap. They raided a vineyard at night, Spartacus leading 10 men to seize food and free 6 slaves, including Duro, a blacksmith. His hammer forged spearheads, bolstering their arsenal. Crixus pushed for bolder strikes, but Spartacus urged patience. "Rome expects rashness. We grow strong first," he said, Oenomaus nodding. At midnight, Scout Agron reported Glaber's 200 men climbing the slope. Spartacus planned a trap in a narrow ravine. Gannicus taunted the Romans, luring them in, while Spartacus and Crixus rolled stones from above, routing the cohort. They seized weapons, but lost 5 men. At dusk, Spartacus buried the fallen, his heart heavy. "We fight for them," he told the rebels. Naevia, gripping her knife, added, "And those still chained." As chapter 4 closes, Spartacus's army forms, their victory a spark against Rome. But greater forces loom. What will the empire unleash? Stay tuned for the final chapter. Chapter 5. The defiant flame extinguished. The craggy slopes of Mount Vesuvius stood silent under a blood-red sunset in 71 BCE, 2 years after Spartacus and his rebel army first broke their chains in Capua. Now numbering thousands, gladiators, freed slaves, farmers, and women like Mira and Naevia, they had become a storm that shook the Roman Republic. Spartacus, his face etched with scars and resolve, led them from their volcanic stronghold, their raids having grown into pitched battles against Rome's legions. The Senate, humiliated by Praetor Glaber's defeat, had unleashed Marcus Licinius, Crassus, Rome's richest man, with 8 legions to crush the rebellion. As Spartacus stood on a ridge, his sword heavy with use, he knew the end was near. This final chapter reveals how one slave's defiance became legend, and how Rome's wrath sealed his fate. The rebel camp, sprawling across Vesuvius's lower slopes, buzzed with defiance. Tents of scavenged cloth housed thousands, their numbers, swollen by slaves fleeing villas and mines across Italy. Spartacus had forged them into a disciplined force, blending gladiator tactics with guerrilla strikes. Crixus, his fiery second-in-command, led cavalry raids, while Oenomaus trained spearmen, his stoic presence a rock for the weary. Gannicus, ever roguish, scouted with Varro, whose maps guided them through Italy's wilds. Mira's slingers and Naevia's archers, trained in secret, struck from cliffs, their accuracy deadly. Duro, the blacksmith, hammered out swords, his forge glowing through the nights. Yet supplies dwindled, grain sacks half empty, water scarce, and winter looming. Spartacus gathered his leaders in a torchlit cave, Vesuvius's rumble a grim backdrop. "Crassus comes with 40,000 men," he said, his voice steady. "We've beaten consuls, but this is Rome's full might." Crixus, his arm bandaged from a recent skirmish, slammed his fist. "We fight! Let's take Rome itself." Oenomaus shook his head. "Their numbers crush us in open battle." Varro, studying a map, suggested, "We head south to Sicily, free more slaves, build ships, escape." Spartacus nodded, his thoughts drifting to Sura, his lost love. "Sicily offers hope, but Crassus blocks our path. We must outwit him." Their plan was bold, a feigned retreat north to draw Crassus's legions, then a swift march south through Lucania's forests. Spartacus led a diversion, ambushing a Roman supply train near Nola. His men, cloaked in stolen legionary armor, struck at dawn, seizing wagons of bread and wine. Mira's slingers pelted the guards, while Naevia's arrows felled officers. The rebels vanished into the woods, leaving a burning camp, but Crassus was no Glaber. His scouts tracked them, and by nightfall, a legion camped at their heels, their fires a menacing glow. Spartacus, tending a wounded Agron, whispered, "We move faster, brother. Freedom's close." The march south was grueling, the rebels dodging, patrols through muddy ravines. Spartacus kept morale high, sharing stories of Thrace's free hills, his voice a beacon. At a river crossing, Crassus's vanguard caught them, 5,000 strong. Spartacus rallied his army, forming a shield. Wall on a hill, Crixus charged their flank, his cavalry trampling Roman scouts, while Oenomaus's spearmen held the line. Spartacus fought at the front, his sword a blur, cutting down a centurion. The rebels won the day, but lost 200, including Varro, his map clutched in his hand as he fell. Spartacus buried him under starlight, his heart heavy. "You guided us true," he murmured. In Lucania, the rebels reached a coastal village, hoping to seize ships, but Crassus had anticipated them, fortifying the region with a trench and wall, trapping them on the mainland. Spartacus, desperate, negotiated with Cilician pirates for passage to Sicily, offering stolen gold. The pirates betrayed them, sailing off with the coin, leaving the rebels stranded. Crixus roared, "We should have fought!" But Spartacus silenced him. "We fight now, or die." He turned to Mira. "Your slingers, target their officers. We break their line." The final battle came at the river Salaris, a muddy plain under a storm-dark sky. Crassus's legions, 40,000 disciplined soldiers, faced Spartacus, 10,000 rebels, their ranks a patchwork of courage and desperation. Spartacus devised a desperate plan. Use the storm's cover to hit Crassus's center, aiming for the general himself. At dawn, rain lashed the field as Spartacus led the charge, his war cry echoing. Crixus's cavalry smashed the Roman left, but Crassus' reserves countered, their pillar raining down. Wenemaus fell, pierced by a spear, his last words, "Live free." Gannicus, wounded, fought on, grinning through bloodied teeth. Spartacus, atop a stolen horse, cut toward Crassus, his sword felling legionaries. Mira's slingers struck true, downing officers, but Roman numbers overwhelmed them. Naevia, firing arrows, was surrounded, her scream cut short. Spartacus reached Crassus' command, their eyes locking for a moment, but a Roman blade struck his thigh, toppling him. His men rallied, dragging him back, but the rebels broke, thousands cut down or captured. Spartacus, bloodied, stood one, last time shouting, "We are free," before vanishing in the melee. Rome's vengeance was merciless. Crassus crucified 6,000 survivors along the Appian Way, their bodies a grim warning. Spartacus's fate remains a mystery. Some say he died at Silarus, his body lost. Others claim he escaped, a ghost haunting Rome's nightmares. His rebellion, though crushed, ignited hope in countless slaves, a spark that lingered in whispered tales. Crixus, Gannicus, Mira, and Naevia perished, but their names lived on, etched in the hearts of the oppressed. The Senate declared Spartacus dead, but his legend grew. Slaves whispered his name in fields, gladiators carved it in cell walls. Rome, shaken, tightened its grip, but cracks remained. Spartacus, the Thracian wolf, had defied an empire, proving one man's courage could challenge the eternal city. As we close this tale, grab a cup of tea and reflect. If this story stirred you, hit that like and subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. Comment below, what did you think of Spartacus's stand? As chapter 5 ends, Spartacus' rebellion burns out, but his legacy endures, a defiant flame against Rome's might. The empire stood, but the slave who dared remains eternal.